He thought there would never be music in this house again. But one night the maid sat down at the piano and everything changed. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The sea whispered relentlessly against the stone walls of the Rains estate, its rhythm constant and tireless, like the heartbeat of something ancient. The mansion stood solemn and proud on the edge of the Florida coastline, where palm trees bent gently under the Atlantic breeze and sunlight painted gilded patterns across the wide marble terraces. From a distance, it looked timeless, untouched by the passage of years. But within its sprawling halls and endless rooms, time had stopped long ago. William Rains sat alone in the study, his body reclined in a high-backed leather chair facing the darkened window. The ocean beyond rolled into the night, and the light from the chandelier above cast a golden halo around the figure of the man who had once built an empire from music. Now, the silence around him was so complete that it had taken on a sound of its own, a dense, ringing hush that settled deep into the bones. At 73, William was the kind of man whose presence still commanded attention, though he no longer sought it. His hair was a sharp silver, combed precisely back, and his tailored shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows betrayed arms still strong despite age. In his youth, he had been called a prodigy, a master, a visionary. His company, Rains Music Holdings, had once controlled the destinies of half the recording artists on the East Coast. But none of that mattered anymore. Not since Lily. Lily. The name alone could stir a storm in him that he no longer had the strength to weather. She had been everything he wasn't. Soft where he was sharp, brave where he was cautious. Her fingers had danced across keys with a fire that could not be taught. From the moment she touched a piano, it was clear she was born for it. But with that gift came defiance, and eventually distance. They had fought endlessly in her final months. She wanted freedom, a life outside the press, the contracts, the rehearsals he insisted were necessary. She wanted to play on her own terms. He wanted to protect her, from critics, from failure, from herself. 17 years ago, Lily had disappeared in a fire. She had been living in a small artistic retreat in Vermont, a place William had never approved of. One night, a blaze consumed the entire building. The bodies of several residents were recovered, badly burned. One was identified as hers, though William had never been given full closure. She had been declared dead, and the light that filled his world had been extinguished. After her death, William closed the music room. The 9-foot Steinway she once played was covered, locked, and forgotten. No one was allowed to touch it. Servants were instructed to avoid the western wing entirely, and William himself had not set foot there in more than a decade. He lived now among echoes, the echo of her laughter in the halls, the echo of her defiant arguments, the echo of his regrets. And so, when the new housekeeper arrived, he barely noticed. Her name was Mela. Young, quiet, and dark-skinned, she moved through the estate like a shadow, never lingering, never intruding. She had been hired through a domestic agency when the last maid resigned without notice. William had not interviewed her. He didn't care to. She lived in the small quarters behind the laundry wing, worked the odd hours no one else wanted, and asked for nothing more than a modest wage. The staff said she was hard-working, respectful. That was enough. But Mela was more than she appeared. Each evening, after finishing her duties, she would walk the house slowly, as if memorizing it. She learned its rhythms, its silences, and most of all, she learned the layout. Something about the mansion called to her, particularly the west wing, the part no one entered. And though she had been warned not to go near it, her curiosity burned brighter each day. It wasn't long before she found the door. It stood at the end of a long corridor, half hidden behind an antique armoire. The lock was old, brass, and unpolished, the doorknob cold to the touch. Something inside her stirred as she stood before it, a kind of ache in the chest that had no name. She didn't know why, but the room beyond felt familiar. That night, after the house had gone quiet and the sea's lullaby deepened, Mela returned. With trembling fingers, she picked the lock, a skill she had learned not from delinquency but necessity, when she had been locked out of orphanage storage rooms or denied access to the only piano the home had. Inside the dark room, the smell of dust and old velvet hit her first, followed by the faintest trace of something floral, something sweet, like perfume long faded. She turned on the lamp beside the massive black grand piano, and her breath caught in her throat. The instrument was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It seemed alive in the dim light, its surface smooth as glass, the keys still white despite years of abandonment. She stepped toward it as if approaching an altar. Her hand hovered over the keys, and she hesitated, almost expecting an alarm to sound. But the room remained still, and the only sound was her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She pressed one key, softly. The note rang out pure and perfect, then another, and another. Mela sat down. She did not read music. Everything she played by memory, or rather by instinct. Since she was a child, there were melodies in her dreams, fragments, wisps, emotions shaped into sound. She had no idea where they came from. At the orphanage, there had been a battered, upright piano that she snuck to at night, trying to make sense of the music inside her. It was as though someone else's memories had taken root in her soul. Now, in this room, with this piano, her hands moved as if they had always belonged here. The music flowed from her like breath. She didn't know what she was playing, only that it felt familiar, achingly so. A bittersweet melody, full of longing and something deeper. Her eyes closed, her fingers moved faster. For the first time in years, she felt whole. She did not see the shadow that had crept to the far end of the hall. William Raines, sleepless again, had been pacing when the first notes reached him. He stopped cold. His blood ran cold. That song. He moved slowly, silently toward the forbidden room. The music grew clearer. The pattern, the phrasing. It was impossible. He stopped at the door and placed his hand on the wood. He did not enter. He didn't dare. The melody ended just as suddenly as it had begun. Silence returned. William backed away, breathless. Upstairs in her narrow bed, Mela stared at the ceiling, her fingers still tingling from the keys. Something had happened. She didn't understand what. She only knew that whatever lived inside that music, it belonged to her. The following days passed quietly. William did not speak of what he heard. He tried to convince himself it had been a dream, a phantom of memory brought on by age. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something was stirring in the house, in him. Mela continued her duties unnoticed, but every night she returned to the room. And every night William listened. The music returned, never the same twice, always haunting. He tried to ignore it, then tried to capture it. He had staff check the cameras. None were working in the West Wing. He accused the butler of lying, of letting someone into the room. The man swore he had done no such thing. Then William had the locks changed. Still, the music came. It crept into his dreams. It called to him through the walls. The past, it seemed, was no longer content to remain buried. Mela, unaware she was being heard, played with increasing confidence. The melodies were becoming clearer, fuller. She began to weep as she played, though she didn't know why. She felt both joy and grief, a grief that felt older than she was. The house was awakening, and so was William. In the stillness of that vast mansion, as moonlight spilled across the marble floors and the sea pounded relentlessly against the shore, something long dormant stirred between them, a fragile thread of memory and blood winding its way through time. Neither of them knew it yet, but the music had begun to speak, and soon it would demand to be heard. The sound came again the next night, as inevitable as the tides that broke themselves into foam against the rocks beneath the mansion. This time, William Raines was already awake. He had not slept since the previous evening, his body restless with the lingering residue of a memory he could not place, a note he could not silence. He sat in the same leather chair in his study, back straight despite the ache in his spine, a glass of untouched scotch sweating on the end table beside him. Rain was beginning to pelt the tall glass panes with a quiet insistence, painting trails across the vast windows that overlooked the sea. Somewhere, deep in the silence of the house, the first few notes began to rise. His heart clenched. He remained still. At first, he thought he imagined it again, that his mind, softened by the weight of sleeplessness and age, was playing cruel tricks. But then the melody solidified, soft, haunting, painfully precise. It was the same piece. Not identical, no. There were shifts in the phrasing, a hesitation where there had once been certainty, but the shape of it was unmistakable. It was hers. William stood slowly, fingers trailing the edge of the desk for balance. He moved like a man following a ghost, letting the sound lead him. It drifted through the air, threading itself into the old walls, slipping beneath doors, curling around corners. The corridor toward the west wing was dimly lit, and as he approached the now reinforced door to the music room, he saw the faint line of golden light beneath it. His chest tightened. He did not barge in. He simply stood, breathing, listening. The song came in waves, melancholy and strangely familiar. It had never been published, never recorded. He had composed it one autumn afternoon long ago, when Lily had begged him to write something just for her. They had called it a secret between them. It had never left the house. And now here it was, alive again, played not with mastery, but with something even rarer, intuition. The kind of instinct born not from training, but from inheritance. Something that passed not from teacher to student, but from blood to blood. He left before it ended. The next morning, the house was bright with sunlight, as if the storm the night before had never happened. But William's mood remained dark. Over breakfast, he asked the butler to check the security footage for the West Wing. "There is none, sir," the man replied without hesitation. "The camera system was never updated for that part of the house as per your standing order." William frowned. "That was 17 years ago." "Yes, sir, we followed your request to the letter." He did not respond. The idea that he had trapped himself in his own fortress of grief was not new, but it felt newly absurd now, when there was something, or someone, clearly intruding upon it. That afternoon, he walked the length of the house, slowly, methodically, as if reacquainting himself with the geography of his own exile. He passed paintings he had long forgotten were there, family photographs gathering dust, pianos shut tight in their corners like relics. Every room whispered with the memory of sound, but it was the music room that pulled him, like a tide drawing a boat to shore. He did not enter. Instead, he watched, from the shadows. He had the staff conduct a thorough inventory of the wing. He questioned them, one by one. No one admitted to entering the west wing. They all insisted the door remained locked, the key stored where he had left it. Yet the lock bore scratches, fresh ones. He began to suspect sabotage. He had the locks changed again, and this time installed a magnetic access panel, one that only he could open. Still, he said nothing of the music to anyone. Not yet. The truth felt fragile, like the edge of something too terrible or too beautiful to name. He wasn't ready. But the music returned. Every night. At first, it was only once a week, then twice. Then, nearly every evening, always after midnight, always brief but potent, like someone pouring their soul into the keys only to vanish before it overflowed. He no longer bothered to sleep. He waited. He stopped reading. He stopped writing. He listened. And the strange thing was, it was beginning to affect him. The melody would haunt him through the day. It followed him down the halls, into the gardens, into the library where he once composed. He tried to hum it aloud, but it cracked in his throat. It wasn't his song anymore. It belonged to the girl. He didn't know her name yet. He hadn't bothered to learn it. She was one of a dozen employees in the house, invisible by design, her purpose to keep the curtains drawn and the rooms clean. But now she occupied a space in his mind that eclipsed everything else. The butler, an old man named Carson, who had served the family since William's father's day, finally noticed the change. "Is something troubling you, sir?" he asked carefully one afternoon. William looked up from his desk, his eyes bleary. "Do you believe the dead can leave pieces of themselves behind?" Carson's expression did not change. "In music, sir, I believe anything is possible." William dismissed him with a wave, but the answer stayed with him. Later that night, he stood at the end of the corridor, hand resting on the wall outside the music room. The door, now reinforced and locked electronically, glowed faintly with the warm light beneath it. And once again, the sound began. This time, the song had evolved. It carried new phrasing, slight modulations that no amateur could compose. But she was still not trained. That much was clear. There were tiny lapses in control, occasional hesitations, but there was something else too, something that made his skin prickle. Emotion. Deep, raw emotion. He finally acted. The next day, William summoned the tech team. He told them to update the surveillance system throughout the West Wing. Discreetly. He wanted every angle covered, especially the music room. Cameras, microphones, motion sensors, the works. He signed the requisition himself and instructed them to install everything within 24 hours. He waited, growing more restless with each hour, but something inside him had begun to solidify. It wasn't just the music. It was the impossibility of it, the familiarity, the unbearable truth that was beginning to rise like a tide inside him, a truth he could not explain, not even to himself. The next night, the music did not come. The silence was crushing. He sat in the dark, staring at the piano's room on the monitor, waiting. Nothing. But then, just before dawn, the camera captured her. Mayla. She slipped into the room, barefoot, wearing an old cotton nightshirt, her hair tied in a loose knot. She looked around, unaware of the camera's silent gaze, and approached the piano with reverence. She lifted the lid gently, ran her fingers over the keys, and began to play. William watched, transfixed. There was no doubt now. It was her, the cleaning girl, the one who barely spoke, the one with no name on her resume except Mayla, foster child. She played with her eyes closed, her face lost in something far beyond herself. She was weeping. He could see it. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks as she moved through the melody. It was as if she were remembering something that had never happened to her. Or perhaps something buried too deep for her to name. He turned off the screen. The next morning, he did not confront her. Not yet. He couldn't. Instead, he called the agency that had placed her. The woman on the line told him that Mela had been in the foster system since infancy. No known parents, no medical history, no family. She had been abandoned outside a hospital in New Jersey 19 years ago. Just a baby in a blanket with a song lyric scribbled on a note, illegible now due to water damage. He hung up the phone with shaking hands. Mela was not an employee anymore. She was a mystery. That night, when the music began again, William did not go to the door. He sat in the hallway just outside and closed his eyes. The sound washed over him like a tide. He remembered the last time Lily played that song. She had been 18, radiant with youth, and angry with him. She had slammed the piano lid shut after the final note, tears in her eyes. "You don't hear me," she had said. He hadn't understood her then. But now he wondered, had she known something even then? Had she left more behind than anyone realized? And who was Mela? He did not believe in reincarnation. He did not believe in ghosts. But he was starting to believe in something else. Inheritance. And music that never truly dies. The day was warm and windless, the kind of Florida afternoon that dulled everything into a slow haze. The sky was a flawless blue, and the ocean shimmered like a great living sheet of glass. But inside the Raines estate there was tension. It hung in the air, invisible but unmistakable, like the charge before a storm. William had barely slept the night before, not because the music played. No, the girl hadn't returned to the piano that night. She hadn't entered the West Wing at all, and that absence only made the ache in his chest more pronounced. The silence had felt deliberate, as if she had sensed something, as if she knew she had been seen. He paced the study restlessly, unwilling to sit, unwilling to think, yet unable to stop. The surveillance footage from the night prior had shown her exiting the servants' wing, lingering in the hallway outside the music room, her hand brushing the lock, but then turning away. There had been hesitation in her step, a heaviness in her shoulders. Perhaps she had sensed the change in the room. Perhaps she had felt the eyes watching. For the first time in years, William felt unsure of himself. He had built his empire on intuition, on an unshakable sense of control. But now, every certainty he had about his life, his past, and his grief was coming undone at the sound of a single girl's hands on a piano. He couldn't bear another night of questions, and so, when the hour grew late and the halls darkened once again, William made his decision. He waited in the shadows outside the music room, his body pressed against the cool marble wall. The lights inside were off. He had left the door unlocked this time. No cameras, no traps, just silence and space. If she came, he would be ready, not to frighten her, not to shame her, but to understand. It was just after 2 a.m. when he heard her, bare feet on polished floors, the faint whisper of breath. She entered the room quietly, as she always did, and closed the door behind her without a sound. William gave her a moment, let her settle. He heard the soft scrape of the bench as she sat, the rustle of her cotton robe. Then the notes began, light, tentative, like footsteps on frozen glass. The same melody, his melody, Lily's melody, their melody. He pushed the door open. She startled violently, hands freezing mid-phrase, head snapping toward the door with wide, terrified eyes. She stood so quickly that the bench toppled over, clattering onto the floor. "I'm sorry," she gasped, voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think anyone was—" Her words collapsed into silence as William stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He stood there, not moving, taking in the scene. The soft lamplight spilling across the room, the open lid of the piano, the panic on the girl's face. She looked younger, up close, slim with delicate features, deep brown skin, and dark eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. Her hair was pulled back into a hurried knot, and her hands trembled at her sides. "What is your name?" he asked at last, his voice low, strained. She hesitated. Mayla Carter." He took a step closer and she flinched. He paused. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said after a moment, "but I need to know, how do you know that music?" She blinked at him. "I don't," she said. "I mean, I've heard it before, in my head, since I was little. Where did you learn it?" "I didn't," she said quickly. "I swear, I don't read music. I don't even know the names of most of the notes. It just comes. It's always been there. I didn't think anyone would hear. I'm sorry. Please don't fire me." William studied her. Everything in him wanted to believe that this was all some strange coincidence. A girl with a natural ear for music, stumbling upon a melody long forgotten. But that didn't explain the phrasing, the nuance, the precise way her hands fell on certain keys, the lift of her wrist on the final chord. That wasn't learned by accident. He moved toward the piano, lifted the bench, and set it upright again. "Sit," he said. Mayla hesitated. "Please." Slowly, nervously, she sat. Her hands remained in her lap, motionless. "Play it," William said, "from the beginning." She looked at him, searching his face for something, permission, perhaps, or forgiveness. Then, almost reluctantly, she placed her fingers on the keys and began. William closed his eyes. Yes, it was the same. Even without sheet music, without training, she knew it. Not just the notes, but the spirit of it. The heartbreak, the hope. The song Lily had played the night before she left. When the final note faded into silence, William opened his eyes. Mayla was crying. "I don't know why I know it," she whispered. "It's just always been there. I hear it in my dreams, like a memory I don't remember." He sat down slowly in the chair beside the piano, hands folded. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, in a voice so soft he barely recognized it as his own, he said, "That song was written for my daughter." Mayla looked at him, stunned. "She died 17 years ago," he said, "in a fire. She was a pianist. She used to play this melody every night." "I'm sorry," Mayla said, her voice barely audible. William nodded absently, eyes fixed on the keys. "It was never published, never recorded. No one but she and I knew it. Not even her instructors, not even her friends. It was private. Ours." Mayla's breath caught. "I didn't steal it, I swear. I believe you." He stood, suddenly exhausted. "You said you've had it in your head since you were a child?" Mayla nodded. "Where were you raised?" She shifted, uncomfortable. "I was left at a hospital in New Jersey. I grew up in the foster system. I don't know anything about my family." William stared at her. "You don't remember anything about your mother?" She shook her head. "No pictures, no stories, just music." A silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. "Go to bed," William said at last. "We'll talk more tomorrow." Mayla hesitated. "Are you going to fire me?" "No." She nodded, confused but grateful, and slipped past him, disappearing down the hallway. William remained where he was, standing before the piano, the air around him still vibrating with echoes. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he stood at the window of his study, watching the sky grow pale with morning light. The pieces were there, scattered, vague, incomplete, but they were forming something. A shape he recognized but couldn't yet name. Mela. The name was unfamiliar, but her face was not. There was something about her. Her posture, the shape of her eyes, the way her brow furrowed when she concentrated. She moved like Lily. She played like Lily. She felt like Lily. But Lily had died. Hadn't she? By dawn, he had made his decision. He called Carson and gave him a name. Garrett Monroe, a private investigator he had worked with 17 years ago. A man who had once scoured the country in search of a girl no one wanted found. "Get me Garrett," he said. "I want everything on this girl. Everything." Carson hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." William returned to the piano, sat on the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. He didn't play. He just sat there, letting his fingers rest where hers had been. The wood was warm. Later that afternoon, Mela packed a small bag. She didn't know what had happened between them last night, only that it had changed something. She had broken a rule, been caught, and yet she had not been punished. He had listened. She walked to the front door, her bag over her shoulder, intent on leaving before things got worse. But William was already there, waiting. "You're not going anywhere," he said calmly. She froze. "There are questions," he said, "things I need to know, things you might need to know too." "I'm just a maid," she said. "No," he said quietly, "you're not." And though neither of them said it aloud, both of them knew that whatever was unraveling between them had only just begun. The sound of footsteps echoed across the marble floor as Garrett Monroe stepped into the Raines estate for the first time in nearly 2 decades. His gait was slower now, more deliberate, and the once dark curls of his hair had surrendered almost entirely to gray. But his eyes, sharp and unrelenting, still held the edge that had made him one of the best private investigators in New York during his prime. He carried with him an old leather briefcase and the weight of familiarity. This was not the first time he had been called to investigate something tied to the name Raines. William met him in the study. The two men shook hands in silence, and Garrett, with a single look at the older man's drawn features, knew that this job wasn't just business. It never had been, not when it came to Lily. "I need you to look into the girl," William said, his voice clipped, almost harsh. "The maid?" Garrett asked. "She's not just a maid," William replied, then paused, his hand tightening around the back of the chair. "Her name is Mela Carter. She claims she was abandoned as an infant, raised in the foster system, no known parents. But she plays." Garrett raised an eyebrow. William's voice dropped, almost as if ashamed to say it aloud. "She plays Lily's song, one that was never recorded, never written down, a piece that only she and I ever knew, and she plays it like Lily did, as if she feels it." Garrett sat down, already taking notes. "You think she's connected?" "I don't think. I know," William said, his voice low and firm. "I just don't know how." "I'll find out." William gave him everything: the footage from the hidden cameras, her employment records from the agency, and the call transcript with the woman from the placement office. Garrett studied it all with a detached focus, nodding occasionally but saying very little. When he left the room, William felt a strange mix of hope and dread, emotions that had long been foreign to him. While Garrett began his search in the bureaucratic tangle of state-run systems and hospital archives, William walked the house restlessly. His thoughts returned again and again to Mela, her face, her posture, the music that poured from her fingers. there was something else too, something more subtle. A gesture, perhaps, or a tone in her voice. Once she had looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes, and for a moment he had been transported back to Lily's 6th birthday, when she had looked up at him the same way, holding her first sheet of composition paper in her tiny hands. The memory unsettled him. That night, Mela did not play. She stayed in her room, silent and withdrawn. William considered knocking, but the walls he had built around himself for 17 years still held strong. Instead, he sat by the fireplace, a photo album open in his lap, pages stiff with time. Pictures of Lily as a child stared back at him, laughing, playing, posing in recital dresses with exaggerated grace. The last photo was one he had taken secretly, just a week before she left. She was sitting at the piano, unaware of the camera, her profile turned in concentration. In that moment, she looked like Mela. 3 days passed before Garrett returned with preliminary findings. They met in the same study, the air thick with anticipation. Mela Carter, Garrett began. No birth certificate, no record of her biological parents. She was found at the steps of a hospital in Newark, New Jersey, 19 years ago, wrapped in a hospital blanket. No note, no name. Nurses called her Baby M until social services arrived. She was placed in the foster system at 2 weeks old. William's fingers curled inward slightly. 19 years. Which, Garrett said, opening his briefcase and sliding a paper across the table, would place her birth almost exactly 9 months after Lily disappeared. William stared at the paper, a summary of intake records from St. Joseph's Hospital, signed and time-stamped. He didn't speak. I checked further, Garrett continued. You and I visited that hospital during the investigation, remember? It was one of the last places Lily was traced to before the fire. At the time, we found nothing, but they've since digitized records. A new name came up, an appointment made under the alias Emily Walsh. Fake, but the handwriting on the intake form. He produced another paper, placing it beside the first. Matches. Lily's old piano competition forms almost perfectly. William's world tilted. So she was there? She was there. And, according to the nurse I tracked down, Maria D'Angelo, retired now, this Emily checked in alone, clearly pregnant and frightened. She was admitted for observation. Then, suddenly, she vanished. No discharge paperwork. Just gone. William couldn't breathe. And Mela? No proof, nothing concrete yet, Garrett admitted, but the timelines matched too perfectly to ignore. The hospital, the pregnancy, the disappearance, and a child turning up anonymously a year later. Sir, I think it's very likely Mela is Lily's daughter. A deep, terrible silence settled over the room. William stood slowly, walking to the window. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the glass, indifferent and eternal. He had failed his daughter once, driven her away with his pride, his rigidity, his obsession with control. And now, if what Garrett suggested was true, she had been pregnant, alone, and desperate. He had searched for her everywhere except where it mattered. He had looked for a body, not a life. That night, he found Mela in the music room. She was sitting at the piano, not playing, just resting her hands on the keys. The expression on her face was unreadable, calm, but distant. I want to show you something, he said gently. She turned, startled, but didn't move. He walked toward her slowly, placing a folder on the edge of the piano bench. This is a picture of Lily, he said. My daughter. Mela opened it. Her eyes widened. She looks like me, she whispered. Yes, William said, and there's more. He told her what Garrett had found, The hospital, the nurse, the date of her abandonment. As he spoke, Mela listened with growing disbelief. At first, she looked skeptical, then overwhelmed. Her hands trembled as she reached for the intake forms. "I've never known anything," she said at last. "No birthdays, no family, just music, and dreams I don't understand." "I think you do understand," William said softly. "You just don't remember yet." Her eyes filled with tears. "But if that's true, why didn't anyone come for me?" The question struck William like a blade. He sat beside her, unsure how to answer. "Because I didn't know you existed," he said finally. "If I had, everything would have been different." Mela nodded slowly, blinking rapidly, as if trying to push the tears back. "Do you want to know more?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think I need to." For the first time, they sat side by side without walls between them. They spoke for hours, about Lily, about the past, about the song that had awakened everything. William showed her photographs, letters, compositions. Mela, in turn, told him about the foster homes, the loneliness, the piano she had begged to touch when no one listened. Their stories, so far apart, began to interweave like threads once torn from the same fabric. When Mela finally rose to leave, the sun was just beginning to rise. She turned at the door. "Do you think," she asked, "my mother could still be alive?" William's heart seized at the question. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." And in his mind, the pieces clicked further into place. Not just of who Mela was, but of what still might be found in the ashes of a past he had long believed irretrievable. Tomorrow he would dig deeper, because some music does not die. It waits. Morning came heavy with salt and heat, the kind that clung to the skin and made everything feel weighted, deliberate. The waves outside William Raines's estate churned more aggressively than usual, stirred by distant winds, though the skies remained cloudless. Inside, the house carried a new tension, thinner, sharper, filled not with the gloom of grief but with the buzz of something awakening. It was the pressure of revelation, of truths not yet spoken aloud but already too close to ignore. William stood alone in his library, the thick velvet curtains parted slightly to let in the light. He held a photo of Lily in one hand and a plastic test kit in the other. The contents were simple: a sterile swab, a sealed envelope, instructions he did not need. He had already memorized them days ago. For a man who had once published symphonies and invested in genetic research companies, the process felt almost insultingly easy. And yet, the weight of what it might reveal made his heart thud in his chest like a drumbeat echoing across years of silence. He had not told Mela what he intended to do. Not out of deceit, but hesitation. It wasn't doubt anymore. Not really. Every moment with her unraveled something inside him, something that had been wound so tight for so long he had forgotten it was there. Her voice, her hands, the way she lingered beside the piano without touching it. It was like watching the past echo in real time. But belief, no matter how fierce, was not proof. And William Raines had lived too long on the edge of certainty to gamble on feelings alone. He sent the sample by courier that afternoon. The lab was one he trusted, discreet and specialized in private kinship testing. No names, only code names, control numbers, and cold science. He had provided them with a lock of Lily's hair, preserved in a small envelope from an old family scrapbook, yellowed with time but intact. For Mela, a brush she had left behind in the bathroom would do. The waiting began. 3 days passed with a kind of quiet desperation. William resumed his old routines, but everything felt tentative. He walked the halls, but no longer avoided the west wing. He took his breakfast on the terrace, but the newspaper remained folded, unread. He tried to compose, sitting before the piano with blank sheets of staff paper, but the notes would not come. His fingers hovered above the keys as if afraid that playing might disturb the fragile spell cast over the house. Mela remained withdrawn, though not distant. She resumed her work as if nothing had changed, polishing glass and folding linens with practiced care, but William noticed her glancing more often through open doors, watching him when she thought he didn't see. They spoke little, not because there was nothing to say, but because both sensed that when they spoke again, it would be different. It would have to be. The envelope arrived on the fourth morning. He recognized the courier, a tall man in an unmarked van, sunglasses masking any expression. No questions, no signatures, just a plain manila envelope with a barcoded sticker and the discreet seal of the lab printed in black ink. William thanked him curtly and returned inside, the envelope gripped tightly in his hand, as if it might disappear. He sat alone in the music room. The morning light filtered in through the tall windows, casting long golden stripes across the piano's lid. The room was utterly silent, expectant. He opened the envelope with a knife from his desk drawer. 2 pages, typed, clean, clinical. The conclusion was near the bottom of the second sheet. Probability of relationship, 99.998%. The tested individual is the biological granddaughter of the presumed maternal donor. William stared at the words until the lines blurred. He folded the paper carefully, set it on the piano bench, and rested his head in his hands. So it was true. Mela was Lily's daughter, his granddaughter. For 17 years, she had existed in the world, growing up in strangers' homes, eating from plastic trays, sleeping in shared rooms with no family, while he had lived alone in this silent palace, surrounded by memories and emptiness, while he had built foundations and charities in his daughter's name. The only living piece of her had been out there, abandoned by fate and bureaucracy. And the music had been the only thing that crossed the void. He didn't know how long he sat there. Long enough for the light to shift, for the warmth of the day to thicken. Finally, he stood and went to find her. Mela was dusting the frame of a large oil painting on the second-floor landing, a portrait of William's grandfather in naval uniform. She turned when she heard him, her eyes searching his face with the same mixture of fear and hope that had haunted him for days. "I got the results," he said. She said nothing. I wanted to be sure before I said anything more. Still, she didn't speak. She only waited. He exhaled. "You're Lily's daughter. There's no doubt." Her breath caught, and she leaned back slightly, as if bracing for impact. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "She's really gone?" William nodded. "Yes, I believe she died not long after you were born. But I don't know the whole story. Not yet." Mela's hands gripped the cloth she'd been using. "I used to dream about her, a woman with dark hair. I thought I made her up. She never spoke, but there was always music." He moved slowly, not wanting to startle her, and held out the paper. She took it with both hands, reading silently. When she finished, she folded it neatly, mirroring his earlier gesture. "I guess that makes you my grandfather," she said softly. He nodded once. "Yes, if you want me to be." Mela stared at him for a long moment, then nodded, slowly but firmly. "I think I do." That night, they had dinner together for the first time. not as employer and maid, but as grandfather and granddaughter. The dining room, once used only for formal occasions and charity galas, felt cavernous and unfamiliar. But they sat close at the smaller end of the table and talked. Not about the past, neither was ready for that, but about music and books and food, about the weather. It was a beginning. The next morning, William called Garrett with a new directive. He wanted to find out what had happened to Lily. Not just rumors, not assumptions. Facts. Garrett, ever thorough, returned 2 days later with more than William expected. "There's a clinic," he said, "private, remote, upstate New York. Long-term care for patients with trauma-related memory loss. They don't advertise." A woman matching Lily's description was checked in under a false name in the months after her disappearance. A Mr. Walker, obviously fictional, was listed as the legal guardian. Payments came from an untraceable account routed through multiple shell foundations. William listened in silence, fists clenched. She was there for years. Then, around 7 years ago, she was transferred. The records after that are sealed. No forwarding address, but the nurse I spoke with, older, near retirement, remembered her, said she was withdrawn, didn't speak much, but played piano beautifully. William closed his eyes. "She's alive?" Garrett hesitated. "Possibly. I can't confirm it yet, but it's a lead." Mela sat beside William, hands folded in her lap. She looked pale but composed. "I want to find her," she said. William looked at her. "So do I. I need to know if she ever wanted me." "She did," William said. "I know she did." And he believed it, fiercely, because if she hadn't, if she had given up Mela willingly, the music wouldn't have survived. It wouldn't have lived on in her daughter's hands. Music didn't come from nothing. It came from love, from pain, from memory. It was blood turned into sound. The next days passed in preparation. Garrett continued his search. William made arrangements to secure Lily's medical files, to reopen the investigation into the fire that had taken her from them. Mela, meanwhile, began spending more time at the piano, not just playing, but composing. And William listened for hours at a time, letting her music seep into every corner of the house. One afternoon she came to him with a composition. She had written it by hand, clumsy, uneven, but clear. He read it, his hands shaking. "I don't know what to call it," she said, "but I wrote it for her." He studied the piece. It was Lily's voice and Mela's intertwined, a dialogue across time. "We'll call it Inheritance," he said. She nodded. And that night, as they sat by the open window and listened to the sea, William realized he no longer felt alone. The past had not vanished. It had returned in the shape of a young woman who bore his daughter's fire and his own quiet sorrow. And now, together, they would find the truth. Because some bloodlines do not end. They echo. And the music was no longer sleeping. It was awake. The following days unfolded like the measured turning of a long-forgotten score. Slow, deliberate, each moment steeped in both dread and anticipation. Within the sun-washed walls of the Raines estate, a quiet resolve had taken root, replacing the long-standing stillness that had once cloaked the house in melancholy. William found himself waking earlier, his steps more purposeful, his silences filled not with grief but with thought. Mela moved through the halls differently too, no longer with the cautious gait of a servant, but with the understated presence of someone trying to fit inside a space they weren't yet sure they belonged to. Their shared goal had anchored them both. The truth about Lily, her disappearance, her final months, had become more than just a question of what had been lost. It was now the path toward something neither of them had dared to hope for. For William, it was a last chance at redemption. For Mela, it was the hope of belonging not only to a bloodline, but to a story. Garrett Monroe, as efficient and unflinching as ever, kept his end of the pursuit moving. The transfer records from the clinic in upstate New York had finally been traced to a second location, this one in Arizona, a discreet long-term facility buried in the dry outskirts of the Sonoran Desert. The name was innocuous, almost forgettable, and the paperwork surrounding its operation was convoluted, riddled with redactions and third-party billing. It had the unmistakable signature of a place someone had been paid to forget. "She's there," Garrett had said, handing William a manila folder filled with printed photographs and scribbled notes. Or she was. There's no patient listed under her name, but I spoke with someone on staff who used to be a nurse at the first facility. Said she was transferred to a private wing under the name Eleanor West. Staff were told not to ask questions. William sat in silence, the photographs in his lap. None of them showed Lily. They were satellite images, building blueprints, documentation meant to confirm that the place existed, that the walls were real. But his fingers tightened over the edges of the folder as if it contained her, as if she were folded somewhere in those pages. Mela, sitting across from him, said nothing for a long time. Then, "We have to go." He looked at her. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't hesitant. She was steady, her voice low but firm. "She might not remember me," she said. "She might not be able to speak, but I have to try." William nodded. He didn't speak either. He only reached for the phone and began to make arrangements. They flew out 3 days later, accompanied by Garrett, who insisted on being present for what he called security and logistics. The private plane, one William hadn't used in years, cut clean across the country beneath a cloudless sky. Mela sat by the window the entire time, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for a memory she'd never known. When they arrived, the heat was oppressive. Arizona in early summer was not kind, the air dry and sharp and the sun a relentless presence overhead. The facility was set back from the highway, reachable only by a dirt road that curled like a ribbon of sand through brush and boulders. The building itself was modest, single-story, white-walled, with shaded windows and a small fountain out front whose water sputtered under the weight of the sun. William checked in under his name. There was no need for subterfuge now. The receptionist, a young man with a soft voice and the posture of someone trained to avoid confrontation, looked nervous when William gave the name. "There's a patient here, Eleanor West," William said, not asking but stating. The man hesitated. "She's a long-term resident in the private wing. I'll let the director know you're here." He disappeared behind a door, and for several long minutes they waited in the lobby. Garrett standing, arms crossed, Mela seated, wringing her fingers. William paced, his shoulders rigid. Finally, a woman appeared. She was in her 60s, short and broad-shouldered, with a face carved by years of discretion. "I'm Director Blake," she said. "Follow me." They were led down a corridor lined with pale beige walls and quiet rooms, the hum of ventilation the only sound. She said little, explaining only that the woman known as Eleanor West had been a patient there for over a decade. She didn't speak. She barely responded to stimuli, but she played the piano. "She's in here," the director said and gestured to a door at the end of the hall. Mela reached for the handle first. The room was small, bright from a wall of windows shaded by blinds. It was simple. No decorations, no television, just a bed, a bookshelf, and in the corner, an upright piano with a wooden bench. Sitting on that bench, her back to them, was a woman with long, dark hair streaked with silver, wearing a light blouse and loose pants. Her posture was upright. Her fingers were resting on the keys. William froze. Mela stepped inside. The woman didn't turn. She played a chord, tentative, soft. Mela took another step, and the woman's head tilted just slightly, as if she had caught something in the air. Then another chord, the same one Mela had played all those nights in the mansion. William felt his throat close. "Mom?" Mela's voice cracked. The woman paused. Slowly, almost painfully, she turned. Her face was older, lined, thinner, but it was Lily. It was unmistakably Lily. She looked at them blankly for a moment. Then her eyes moved to Mela, and something flickered. A tremble. A breath caught in the throat. Her lips parted. "Sarah," she whispered. Mela gasped. William took a step forward, but Garrett held out an arm gently, stopping him. Lily stood shakily, as if her body didn't quite remember how. Her hands lifted halfway before falling back to her sides. Her eyes never left Mela. "I knew you'd find me," she said. Then she swayed. Mela reached her in time, catching her as she stumbled. They embraced, not tightly, not firmly, just enough to touch, enough to anchor. Lily wept silently against her daughter's shoulder, her body racked with the fragile sobs of someone who had held everything in for too long. William watched, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. Later, when the director had given them time and space, they sat in the common area with glasses of water. Lily's voice was quiet but present. She answered questions slowly, with gaps, with hesitation. The trauma had been deep, the amnesia real, but pieces had come back, fragments of the fire, of running, of being taken in by someone who promised to help. A man she couldn't name, then doctors, then silence. "Why didn't you say who you were?" William asked softly. Lily looked at him with tired eyes. "I didn't remember. Not until recently. Not clearly." She looked at Mela. "But I remembered you. I dreamed of you. I called you Sarah in my head." Mela nodded. "That was my name in one of the foster homes. Only for a while." Lily smiled faintly. "I think I must have heard it. Held on to it." They stayed the night in a nearby hotel. The next morning, William began speaking with lawyers and physicians about bringing Lily back home. It would be a long process, legal, medical, personal. But it had begun. On the flight home, Mela sat beside Lily, her hand clasped in hers. William sat across the aisle, watching them both. The image burned into his heart. That night, as they returned to the estate, William opened the door to the music room and stepped aside. Lily entered first. She moved to the Steinway Grand and sat down, touching the keys with reverence. Then she turned to Mela. "Play with me?" And side by side, mother and daughter played. Not perfectly, not in unison, but with shared rhythm, shared memory, shared love. William watched them, the last page of a painful chapter fluttering closed behind them. Ahead, unwritten music waited. He picked up a pen. A blank score sat before him, and at last he began to write again. Dawn broke softly over the Atlantic, casting a warm golden haze across the wide windows of the Raines estate. The mansion, once a mausoleum of memory and grief, now stirred with a different rhythm. The scent of brewing coffee floated from the kitchen, mixed with the faint strains of piano notes echoing through the western halls, unpolished, uncertain, but full of life. The music room, long sealed like a crypt, had been returned to its rightful place at the center of the home. Its doors were open, the dust gone, the Steinway polished to a high gleam that caught the morning light like a mirror. And at the heart of it all sat Mela, her fingers wandering delicately across the keys, composing not from sorrow, but from the fragile beauty of what had been found. It had been nearly a month since they brought Lily home. Her return had not been triumphant nor dramatic. It had been quiet, uneven, a slow unfolding of layers too long buried. The journey from Arizona to Florida had taken only hours, but the path between the woman who had been called Eleanor West and the one who once was Lily Raines stretched much further, across decades of lost time, trauma, and silence. The doctors had cautioned them. Recovery would not be linear. There would be moments of clarity, followed by lapses into confusion. Lily might never fully return to the person she had been before, but William did not care. She was alive, she was home, that was enough. Mela, too, had changed. No longer just the quiet housekeeper with the haunted music in her fingertips, she now walked the halls with quiet confidence, the knowledge of who she was lending her a gravity that no surname ever could. She no longer cleaned or carried trays. Instead, she studied. She played. She composed. A private tutor now visited the estate twice a week, guiding her through formal theory and advanced technique. Her mind was quick, her hands even quicker. Everything that had once been locked inside her had begun to pour out, as though the recognition of her lineage had uncorked something deeper. William watched it all with awe and quiet pride. For 17 years he had lived as a man buried beneath regret, unable to let go, unwilling to look forward. But in the space of a few weeks, his world had reshaped itself into something he no longer recognized, something alive. He found himself waking early, reading again, writing music for the first time in years. Sometimes he and Mela would sit at opposite ends of the piano, passing themes back and forth like an unspoken conversation. Other times, Lily would sit and listen, eyes closed, her body still, her breath slow. The music brought her peace, even when words failed her. There were difficult moments, of course. Lily still had nights of unrest when memories came back in broken fragments, confused and sharp. Once, she woke screaming, convinced she was still trapped in the fire, calling for Mela by a name she didn't remember ever speaking aloud. On those nights, Mela would climb into bed beside her, holding her mother until she calmed. William, watching from the doorway, would feel the ache of helplessness again, but now it was softened by the knowledge that they were no longer alone in that pain. Their lives settled into a rhythm. Breakfast shared at the small table on the east veranda. Afternoons filled with practice and study. Evenings with soft conversation, the clink of teacups, and the slow piecing together of a broken family's history. Garrett, his role completed, visited occasionally, but respectfully withdrew. He had done what he was asked. The rest was no longer his to solve. One afternoon, William received a letter from the New York Philharmonic. An old acquaintance on the board had heard whispers that the reclusive maestro was composing again. They wanted to know if he would consider submitting something for their upcoming fall season, a new work, perhaps, to mark his long-awaited return. William read the letter twice, then passed it to Mela without a word. "They want you back," she said. "They want the version of me that died with your mother," he said. Mela didn't argue. She simply placed the letter on the music stand, opened a blank score, and wrote 2 words in the margin: "For Lily." That night, William composed. Not the tortured fragments of years past, not the half-formed sketches left to yellow in drawers, but a full, living piece. He wrote until his fingers cramped and the ink blurred. He wrote of grief, yes, but also of reunion, of silence broken, of music passed through generations like breath. When he was done, the title was simple: Inheritance. He gave the manuscript to Mela the next morning. She read through it slowly, her brow furrowed in focus, her lips moving in silent rhythm as she imagined the sound. "Will you play it with me?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes wet, and nodded. They rehearsed for weeks. On the evening of the private recital, their first and only performance in the house, they invited only a few: Carson the butler, who had served faithfully through it all; Garrett, seated stiffly in a suit that hadn't been worn in years; Lily's old music teacher, a gentle woman now in her 70s, who cried quietly from the moment the music began. The drawing room had been rearranged into a salon. Chairs were placed in neat semicircles. The lights were dimmed, the air filled with the scent of fresh flowers. At the center of the room stood the Steinway, open, waiting. Mela sat on the right, William on the left. Their hands met in the middle. Then, silence. The first notes were soft, a single line, solitary and exposed. Then a second voice joined, tentative, searching. As the piece grew, the two voices intertwined, echoing, harmonizing, sometimes drifting apart, only to find each other again. It was not just music. It was testimony, a telling of all that had been lost and all that had been found: a father, a daughter, a granddaughter. A silence broken by sound. And in the very last bars, as the melody rose to its fragile conclusion, Lily stood from her chair, walked to the piano, and placed her hand over theirs. They held the final chord together. When it faded, the room was utterly still. No one applauded, no one dared. The air was too full, the moment too complete. Later, as the guests departed and the candles burned low, William sat in the music room alone. Mela and Lily were upstairs, laughing softly over a photo album Mela had discovered in the attic. The sound carried faintly through the house, the way laughter once had so many years ago. William turned back to the piano. He placed his hands on the keys. And once again, the house was filled with music. Not a ghost's echo, not a memory, but something new, something whole. For the first time in 17 years, the past was not a weight, but a foundation. And the future, a score yet to be written. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. More stories are coming soon.